Marcus Johnson adjusted his tie while looking into the mirror in his small Atlanta apartment. The reflection staring back at him was of a man fighting not just crime, but also the discrimination permeating his own institution. He knew the day would be tough, but the meeting scheduled for that morning made him particularly anxious. As he entered the precinct, the atmosphere was tense. The faces of his colleagues, once merely indifferent expressions, now seemed full of disdain. Whispers and muffled laughter echoed down the hallway, as if he were a target in a hunting game. "Look who's here, the vigilante," remarked Sergeant Thompson with a sarcastic smile. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to ignore the taunts. He knew that any reaction could escalate the hostile environment. He walked towards the meeting room, each step feeling heavier. Upon entering, he noticed Captain White, who greeted him with a nod, but the air was still thick with distrust. "Marcus, thanks for coming. We need to discuss some complaints we've received," began the captain, his voice firm yet hesitant. His colleagues' eyes turned to him, and he felt the weight of their expectations and prejudices. "Of course, Captain. I'm here to help," Marcus replied, trying to maintain his composure. The rest of the room seemed divided between curiosity and hostility. During the meeting, allegations of abuse and discrimination were discussed, but Marcus noticed that many present were more interested in defending their actions than listening to the grievances. Captain White tried to position himself as an ally, but even his stance seemed to waver in the face of resistance from others. After the meeting, the day dragged on with a heavy rhythm. During a break, while the officers gathered in groups, Marcus distanced himself, avoiding further provocations. But, as if destined to be the target, he couldn't escape. "Hey, did you see the latest video? That guy thinking he's Superman," said one colleague, laughing. "I think he needs a lesson in humility." Marcus felt his blood boil but chose to walk away. He didn't want to add fuel to the fire. "It's not worth it," he thought to himself as he walked away. What bothered him the most, however, wasn't the jokes, but the devaluation he felt in every interaction. During an operation later that day, he found himself face to face with a suspect. As he approached, Thompson abruptly intervened. "You don't want to do this, Marcus. Let me handle it. You might get hurt." Thompson's words were a low blow. He was trying to undermine his authority in front of everyone, and Marcus felt the eyes of other officers weighing on him. "I'm in charge here, Thompson. I can handle it," Marcus responded, his voice firm but his heart racing. Deep down, he felt exhausted. It was a constant battle, and the idea of giving up crossed his mind. But, looking around, he saw the faces of his colleagues, seemingly enjoying his struggle, and a spark of determination ignited within him. He knew he couldn't bear the silence any longer. It was time to act. With the weight of institutional racism on his shoulders, Marcus decided he would start collecting evidence. He knew this decision wouldn't be easy, but the idea of fighting for justice motivated him. "I won't let this continue," he murmured to himself as he planned his next move. The fight against injustice was just beginning, and he was determined to be the voice that would no longer be silenced. As the sun began to set, casting an orange hue over the walls of the Atlanta police precinct, Marcus Johnson spotted David, his old college friend, approaching. David, a fair-skinned officer with brown hair, had a serious and worried look on his face. As they met, Marcus felt a lump in his throat. This wasn't just a reunion, but an attempt to salvage a conversation that could change everything. "Marcus, you need to stop this. It's not going to lead anywhere," David said firmly, but with a touch of empathy. "I know you're facing difficulties, but this will only bring you trouble. The fight is futile." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to contain his frustration. "Futile? Do you really think I should ignore what's happening here? Racism won't disappear if I close my eyes to it. And if I do nothing, who will?" David shook his head, disappointed. "You don't understand. They won't change. It's decades of ingrained culture. You're putting yourself at risk. Think about your career, your family. Hearing those words, Marcus felt torn. The fight for justice and equality pulsed within him, but the idea of losing everything he had built over the years left him in doubt. I can't stay silent, David. Injustice isn't just a problem. It's a wound that needs healing. But David was already walking away, looking more worried than before. Marcus stood there, watching his friend leave, pondering the weight of his decisions. The next day brought a new wave of tension. When a shocking video of a violent police approach by a colleague began circulating on social media, things became even more complicated. The video showed Sergeant Thompson, known for his aggressive stance, using excessive force on an unarmed suspect. "Have you seen this, Marcus?" asked a colleague in the break room as everyone watched the video on their phones. "This idiot is putting all of us in a tough spot. And you? How do you feel being one of the few black people here?" Marcus felt his stomach churn. He knew the video's repercussions could open deeper wounds within the precinct. "This isn't about me. It's about what's wrong with our culture. We need to change that," he replied, trying to stay calm. "Sure, as if that's easy," responded a colleague with a sarcastic smile. "Good luck with that." Those heavy words echoed in his mind. He knew he needed to act, but hesitation consumed him. Talking to his superiors could result in retaliation, and he had already experienced that before. However, the idea of leaving the injustice unanswered consumed him even more. At his desk, surrounded by papers and documents, Marcus decided he could no longer stay silent. He began compiling a dossier, gathering evidence of racism and discrimination he had witnessed. Each page he filled was a mix of hope and fear. He knew he was putting his career at risk, but the urgency of the situation drove him. Finally, after days of preparation, Marcus sat in front of Captain White, his superior, who appeared concerned. "Captain, I have something very serious to discuss," he began, his voice firm. "I can no longer ignore the toxic environment we work in. Things need to change." White looked into Marcus's eyes, realizing the gravity of what he was about to hear. "I'm listening, Marcus. What do you have?" With his heart racing, Marcus handed the dossier to the captain. "This is just the beginning. We need to address this before it's too late." The captain examined the documents, his face becoming serious. "This is very concerning. We need to act, but are you sure you're willing to face the consequences?" The question hung in the air, and Marcus felt the weight of each word. He knew that the fight for justice would require courage, but he also knew he couldn't back down. "I'm ready," he replied, his voice firm. "We need to do this for everyone, not just for me." The tension in the precinct was palpable when Captain White called an emergency meeting. Marcus Johnson, sitting in one of the back chairs, felt the attentive gaze of his colleagues, some of them carrying expressions of disdain and disapproval. The captain, a middle-aged man with gray hair and a firm posture, began speaking, but the anxiety in the room was palpable. The silence was broken only by the occasional sound of a pen scratching paper or the rustle of a notepad. "You all received an email with the accusations of racism involving members of this precinct," began White, his voice echoing against the walls. "It is our duty to investigate these allegations with the utmost seriousness." A murmur ran through the room. Marcus could feel his colleagues' discomfort, and the idea that he was the epicenter of that conversation made him feel exposed and vulnerable. He was not just a police officer. He was a symbol of the complaints circulating, and the resistance to these truths made him feel even more isolated. "I can't believe we're discussing this here," interrupted Sergeant Thompson, one of the team's veterans, with a tone of scorn. "These allegations are baseless. In fact, it's an attack on our integrity as a police force." Marcus felt the anger rise within him, but he managed to stay calm. "If you really believe the evidence is baseless, Maybe you should take a closer look at your own actions, Thompson, he responded, his voice firm but controlled. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to Thompson, who seemed to have been struck by lightning. You have no idea what you're talking about, kid, he retorted, contempt dripping from every word. You're just trying to draw attention to yourself. Enough, White shouted, slamming his hand on the table. This isn't about you, Thompson. It's about what's happening in this precinct. We need to be better. We need to be fair. The tension continued to hang in the air as the meeting proceeded. Marcus realized that despite the captain's promise to investigate, the cooperation from the superiors could be superficial. He remembered the subtle retaliations he had already faced. Colleagues who sabotaged his investigations, information that disappeared, whispers in the corners. It was a hostile environment, and he needed to stay a step ahead. When the meeting finally ended, Marcus left the room feeling that his effort was just beginning. On his way to his desk, he felt Thompson's gaze burning into his back. He turned, facing the sergeant. I'm not giving up, Thompson. The truth always comes out. Thompson's response was a sarcastic smile, but Marcus refused to be intimidated. He knew he was fighting not just for himself, but for all those who had suffered in silence. In the following days, the retaliations intensified. Colleagues who once were friends now ignored him or exchanged looks of contempt. He started receiving anonymous messages on his phone, some of them threatening, suggesting he should back off. One of them said, "If you don't stop, you'll regret it." The words echoed in his mind, but he refused to be intimidated. In a moment of clarity, he decided he could no longer act alone. He needed allies. That's when he found Lisa, a new sergeant in the precinct who, despite her limited experience, also faced discrimination. They met during a coffee break, and Marcus felt an immediate connection. I've heard some things about you, Marcus, and I want you to know you're not alone in this fight, said Lisa, looking him in the eyes with sincerity. We need to stick together. Their conversation flowed naturally, and Marcus felt relieved to have an ally. But, at the same time, the shadow of the anonymous threat loomed over him, and the reality of the struggle he faced became clearer every day. The truth needed to be exposed, but the cost of that exposure was still uncertain. He knew the echo of the truth could not only set him free but also bring devastating consequences for those who opposed it, and that left him in a state of constant vigilance, ready to face whatever came next. Marcus Johnson sat at his desk, the fluorescent light of the precinct reflecting off his tense face. He looked around, watching his colleagues in animated conversations, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being a stranger in his own home. The tension in the air was palpable, like a storm about to break. The sound of the phone ringing cut through the silence, and he answered, not knowing that call would change everything. Marcus, are you coming to the meeting with Captain White? Asked Sergeant Lisa, his new colleague. Her voice was firm, but there was concern in her tone. Yes, I'm on my way, Marcus replied, trying to hide his anxiety. What do you think will happen? I don't know, but we need to be prepared. The captain is aware of the accusations, and this could be a turning point for us. As he walked to the meeting room, Marcus thought about the courage Lisa had shown. Since she had joined the precinct, he had felt a glimmer of hope. Lisa had also faced discrimination and, though their experiences were different, there was a connection between them. She didn't hesitate to speak out against what was wrong. In the meeting room, Captain White stood, looking at the officers settling in. The atmosphere was heavy, and Marcus could feel the disapproving looks from the other men and women in uniform. He sat next to Lisa, and they exchanged a look that spoke more than words. Thank you all for coming, White began, his voice firm. Today, we're here to discuss the allegations of racist behavior within our unit. The evidence is troubling. Murmurs ran through the room. Marcus could see the faces contorting with discomfort. He knew many there would deny the accusations and try to discredit his experiences. The meeting continued with White presenting the data Marcus had collected, but many of the officers were defensive. "This is a witch hunt," shouted one of the officers, furious. "We can't be judged for a few isolated cases." "They're not isolated cases," Marcus intervened, his voice firm. "This is a pattern of behavior we can't ignore." The discussion intensified, and as tempers flared, Marcus saw Lisa lean towards him. "We need to do more than just talk," she whispered. "We need concrete evidence." The idea of gathering more evidence crossed Marcus's mind, but he knew it was risky. However, Lisa's determination sparked a fire within him. "You're right," he replied, determined. "I'll record a conversation with Sergeant Thompson. He can't keep getting away with this." The following days were marked by growing tension. Marcus and Lisa worked together, sharing information and supporting each other. However, he couldn't ignore the increasing hostility from some colleagues. Malicious comments and contemptuous looks became routine, but Marcus persevered. He knew the truth needed to be exposed. One afternoon, while reviewing some notes in the break room, Marcus found Thompson talking to another officer. He took out his recorder and hid it in his shirt pocket. His heart raced as he approached. "Do you think the captain will really do something?" Thompson said, laughing. "This is just a phase. These guys are just trying to play the victim." Marcus couldn't resist the urge to listen more. He stood still, holding his breath as Thompson continued to make disparaging remarks about black colleagues and how the justice warriors were weak. "They need to know their place." "This isn't school," Thompson finished, laughing again. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, Marcus decided it was time to act. He couldn't stay silent any longer. The recording was the evidence he needed. That conversation would become a crucial piece in the fight for justice. As soon as the recording was finished, Marcus felt a mix of relief and tension. He knew he was putting himself in a delicate position, but the urgency for change was greater. He and Lisa met at a nearby cafe that night, and Marcus told her about the recording. "This could change everything, Marcus," Lisa said, her eyes shining with determination. "We need to be cautious, but this is an important step." The conversation flowed, full of hope and plans for the future. But deep down, Marcus knew the storm was just beginning. They were about to challenge not just discrimination, but also the power structures sustaining racism within the institution. And once the truth was revealed, nothing would be the same. The environment at the precinct was more tense than ever. Marcus and Lisa sat at one of the tables in the break room, surrounded by a stifling silence that seemed to echo their restless thoughts. The atmosphere was heavy, and the distrustful looks from colleagues made it hard to breathe. "Do you feel this?" Marcus asked, breaking the silence. Lisa nodded, her eyes scanning the room. "The pressure is palpable. They're desperate to silence us." Marcus leaned back in his chair, frustration evident on his face. "We can't let that happen. We already have enough evidence against Thompson, but what if the superiors decide to cover it up? They have a lot to lose." Lisa shook her head, her brown hair swaying gently. "If they cover it up, it will only make things worse. And if Thompson gets promoted, that would be a slap in the face to all of us." The discouragement hung in the air, but Marcus felt the flame of determination ignite within him. "We need to act before it's too late." At that moment, Captain White entered the room, his expression serious and concerned. "Marcus, Lisa, I need to talk to you. What's happening in the precinct can't continue." He closed the door, creating a safe space for the conversation. "I've received calls from the media and some of our superiors. They want an answer about the accusations. And honestly, I don't know how to justify them." "Captain," Marcus began, his voice firm, "if we don't take action now, the situation will only get worse. Thompson can't be promoted. He has to be held accountable for his actions." White sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. I know, but the corruption here is deep. There are people who don't want this to come to light. They have a lot to lose. But what about us? What about our lives? What about our integrity? Lisa asked, passion evident in her voice. If we don't fight for this, who will? The captain looked at her, admiring her bravery, but concern was still present. I'll start a formal investigation, but that may not be enough, he said, his tone somber. We need more evidence. We need a strategy. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. What if we go to the press? If we expose everything? That could force our superiors to act. The idea hung in the air, and the captain hesitated. That could put us in a very difficult position. Are you aware of the risks? Yes, Marcus replied, his gaze determined. But if we do nothing, we're just allowing this injustice to continue. We can't stay silent. All right, White agreed, his expression shifting to one of resolution. If we decide to go down this path, we need to be prepared for everything, including retaliation. The conversation was interrupted when a colleague entered abruptly, breaking the tense atmosphere of the meeting. Hey, Captain, what's going on here? His tone was disdainful, and Marcus noticed the look of contempt he threw their way. Are you plotting something? The tension increased, and Lisa didn't hesitate. We're trying to do what's right. Something you clearly don't understand. The colleague laughed, mocking their courage. You think you can change the precinct? That's funny. Marcus stood up, facing the man firmly. We're fighting for justice, and that's more than you'll ever do. Don't underestimate what we can achieve. The colleague rolled his eyes and left, but his words echoed in Marcus's mind. We need to act quickly, he said, turning back to Lisa and White. We can't let fear win. Let's prepare for this press conference. Lisa nodded, her expression determined. I'm with you, Marcus. Let's expose this injustice. We can't let them silence us. With a renewed sense of urgency, they began planning the press conference. Meanwhile, the shadow of retaliation and silencing still loomed over them, but Marcus and Lisa's determination grew, fueled by the need for justice and the fight against the oppression that had hurt them so deeply. What lay ahead would be a test of courage, but they were ready to face the approaching storm. Marcus sat at a conference table next to Lisa as the flashes of cameras illuminated the room. The air was thick with anticipation and tension. The press conference he had organized was not just a formality, but a cry for justice that needed to be heard. He looked at Lisa and, with a nod, signaled that he was ready. Lisa, always firm by his side, leaned forward slightly and began to speak. Thank you all for being here today, she said, her voice echoing in the room. We are here to address serious issues that affect not just our precinct, but the entire Atlanta community. Marcus observed the reactions of the reporters and cameras. Some seemed skeptical, others anxious. He remembered the threats he had received, the attempts to silence him, but now he was determined not to back down. He stood up, taking the floor. In recent months, I have collected evidence that reveals a pattern of racism and discrimination within this institution, he began, his voice firm. This evidence cannot be ignored. What is at stake is the community's trust in the police and, more importantly, the lives of the people we serve. The reporters started asking questions, and Marcus was prepared to answer them. He detailed the recordings he had made, the anonymous messages he received, and how many colleagues tried to discredit him. Deep down, he knew the truth had undeniable power. You are accusing your colleague, Sergeant Thompson, of racist behaviors, but how can we be sure your evidence is legitimate? Asked a reporter, raising an eyebrow. I understand the doubt, Marcus replied, but the evidence speaks for itself. The recording I made of Thompson leaves no room for doubt about his intentions and attitudes. This is a matter of integrity and doing what is right. As he spoke, He saw Captain White enter the room, his expression serious. The captain had stood by him at times, trying to be an ally, but now he seemed pressured by the situation. Marcus knew the truth was finally emerging, and public pressure was forcing the superiors to act. "Marcus," White intervened, "I want to assure everyone that we are taking these accusations very seriously. The investigation into Sergeant Thompson is underway, and we will not tolerate behaviors that tarnish the police's image." The press conference continued, and the tension in the room seemed palpable as more questions were asked. Marcus realized that his determination was inspiring others, and the idea of a new path for the police began to take shape. After the press conference, when the lights went out and the reporters dispersed, Marcus and Lisa walked away, relieved but aware there was still much to do. "You were amazing out there, Marcus," Lisa said, smiling. "Things are changing, and you're part of it." "I hope so," he replied, feeling a mix of hope and emotional burden. "But there's still a long way to go. Thompson won't just accept this without a fight." The following days were tumultuous, but public pressure didn't relent. The precinct began re-evaluating its practices, and Thompson's dismissal seemed imminent. When the news finally came, Marcus felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Justice was beginning to manifest. However, the impact of this struggle also brought recognition for Marcus. At a ceremony, Captain White announced his promotion to sergeant, and he found himself surrounded by colleagues who, for the most part, had previously despised him. Now, he was seen as a symbol of change, and that filled him with renewed pride. "You did it, Marcus. You changed things," Lisa said, with a shine of admiration in her eyes. "I didn't do it alone," he replied, looking around. "And this is just the beginning. Let's turn this precinct into a safe and fair place for everyone." With renewed determination, Marcus felt that he was finally breaking the chains of racism, not just for himself, but for a new generation of officers to come. He was ready to face any challenge that came his way, determined to be the voice of change and defend the justice he always believed was possible. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and check out this next story that's truly exciting.